In the heart of a quiet New England town, the Perron family moved into what seemed like their dream home. But as soon as they stepped through the door, they unknowingly invited a malevolent force into their lives. What followed was a terrifying series of events that would push their family to the brink, leading them to seek help from paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. This is the chilling true story of the haunting that inspired The Conjuring. The old colonial farmhouse in Harrisville stood silent and brooding under a gray Rhode Island sky. Weathered wood, sagging porch, and rusted hinges whispered stories of time long past. Roger Perron felt a quiet satisfaction as he turned off the ignition of the moving truck. Behind him, his wife Carolyn stepped out, holding the hand of their youngest daughter. 4 more girls tumbled out of the car with laughter and excited shrieks. The family of 7 had finally found their dream home. 300 acres of land, solitude, and charm. It was everything they had hoped for. The girls ran through the open field, chasing one another in the dying light of afternoon, their voices echoing across the trees. But the house seemed to watch them. Inside, the air was stale, dense with the smell of damp wood and something else, something faintly sour like rotting apples. Dust clung to every surface, and the floors creaked with every step. The previous owner had left in haste, leaving behind furniture, portraits, and a lingering unease. That night, as the family unpacked boxes and set up their rooms, April, the youngest, sat alone in a corner talking to someone. "Who are you talking to, honey?" Carolyn asked, smiling. April looked up innocently. "Rory. He said he used to live here. He likes to play hide and clap." Carolyn laughed uneasily, brushing it off as child's imagination. But when she turned away, April whispered into the shadows, "Don't worry, I won't tell them where you're hiding." Darkness came swiftly to the Harrisville farmhouse, and with it, a stillness that pressed against the windows like an unseen presence. The family gathered in the living room, the crackle of the fireplace offering the only warmth against the biting chill that seeped through the walls. Carolyn felt it first, a draft unnaturally cold brushing the back of her neck. She turned, expecting to see an open window, but everything was shut tight. She rubbed her arms and joined her daughters by the fire, dismissing the sensation. Upstairs, the girls settled into their new rooms. Andrea and Nancy shared one, Christine and Cindy another, and April had a smaller room near the stairs. As the night deepened, the giggles of excited children faded into silence. Then came the knock. Clap, clap, soft, distant, as if someone had slapped their hands together in the dark hallway. Andrea sat up in bed, blinking into the shadows. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Nancy. Nancy stirred. "It's just the house settling." But Andrea wasn't so sure. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 3:07 a.m. Carolyn sat up in bed, suddenly awake. She couldn't explain why. There had been no sound, no movement. Just a heavy feeling in her chest, like something was watching her. Roger snored quietly beside her, undisturbed. Then came the smell, putrid and sharp like rotting meat. She gagged, covering her nose. From somewhere inside the house, a door creaked open. She rose, heart pounding, and stepped into the hallway. The smell grew stronger. She followed it down the stairs, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The darkness seemed thicker than before. When she reached the kitchen, everything was still. Silent. Empty. Then crashed. A picture frame fell off the wall, shattering on the floor. She screamed, but no one came. Behind her, unseen in the gloom, a shadow moved across the far wall, and paused, watching her. The next morning, Carolyn chalked up the strange events to exhaustion and a long day of moving. But the girls were buzzing with energy, ready to explore every corner of the creaky old house. "Let's play hide and clap," April shouted, her tiny hands already clapping as she ran through the hallways. The game was simple. One child was blindfolded while the others hid. The seeker could call out "clap," and the hiders had to respond with a clap to give a clue. Cindy volunteered to be blindfolded first. As Carolyn tied a scarf around her daughter's eyes, she laughed at their excitement, glad for a moment of peace. "Don't break anything," she called out as the girls scattered. Cindy walked slowly through the hallway, arms outstretched. "Clap," she whispered. Clap, clap. The sound came from the laundry room. She turned carefully toward it. "Clap again," she said. Clap, clap. Smiling, she reached for the source, her hands grasping empty air. Then something brushed against her face. She froze. "April?" she asked. No answer. She pulled off the blindfold. The laundry room was empty. Completely empty. Upstairs, Carolyn was folding sheets when she heard another round of claps echo through the floorboards. She smiled, until she remembered the girls had stopped playing 10 minutes ago and were now outside with Roger. She stood still, listening. Clap, clap. This time it was directly behind her. She spun around, but no one was there. The sheet in her hands floated gently to the floor, settling into the shape of a person for a split second before collapsing. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, Carolyn felt a flicker of something she had not dared to acknowledge since they arrived: fear. Days passed, and the Perron family began to settle into a strange rhythm. One that included creaking floorboards, whispers in the night, and the occasional sound of footsteps when no one else was home. Carolyn began waking up more tired than she had been before going to bed. Her body ached. At first, she blamed the stress of the move, the long days, the cold draft that never left the house. But then she noticed the bruises. They started small, circular, dark patches on her arms and legs. Then they grew. Larger. Angrier. Some shaped like fingerprints. Roger joked nervously, "Maybe you're sleepwalking into furniture." But Carolyn knew she wasn't. One morning, as she lifted her nightgown in the mirror, she gasped. A long, jagged bruise stretched across her back like she'd been dragged or clawed. Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't told the girls. She didn't want to scare them. That day, Andrea approached her in the kitchen, her face pale. "Mom?" Cindy said she saw something in her room last night. Carolyn stiffened. What did she see? Andrea hesitated. A woman. In the corner. She was just standing there. She thought it was you until she saw your picture on the wall and realized the face was wrong. That night, Roger suggested they sleep with the lights on. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the clock struck again. Carolyn sat bolt upright. The house was completely still except for the ticking of the clock. Then the bed shook. Roger jolted awake. Earthquake. But the walls weren't trembling. Only the bed. As if something beneath it was trying to push them off. Carolyn pulled the covers tighter, her heart thudding. Then came the whisper. So close it felt like breath in her ear. "She doesn't like you," Carolyn screamed. The morning after Carolyn's scream, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The children avoided the second floor, especially April's room. Even the dog, Sadie, refused to enter the house anymore. She barked endlessly at the front porch, hackles raised, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Carolyn, determined to understand what was happening, began digging into the property's past. A trip to the local library unveiled a history far darker than she had feared. The land had belonged to a woman named Bathsheba Sherman, born in the early 1800s. Locals believed she practiced witchcraft. One account claimed she had sacrificed her infant to the devil. Another said she cursed the land before hanging herself from a tree behind the house. More chilling was the pattern of death linked to the property: murders, suicides, drownings. Over the decades, multiple children had died in the home. Women had gone mad. Families didn't stay long. Carolyn returned home shaken. That night, she found April playing alone in her room, staring at the wardrobe. "What are you doing, sweetie?" Carolyn asked. April didn't look away. "Rory says that lady is watching you. The one that talks to him is different now." Carolyn felt a chill. "Different how?" she asked softly. April's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's angry." Later that evening, Carolyn climbed the creaky attic stairs for the first time. Dust choked the narrow passage. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the temperature drop. Her flashlight flickered. In the far corner, she saw it, a small cradle untouched by time. And on the wall above it, carved into the wood, Bathsheba. Suddenly, something moved in the shadows. Carolyn turned, heart racing. The attic door slammed shut behind her. And in the dark, something hissed. "Leave. Now. Shall we move on to narrative 6? It's only getting more terrifying from here." The atmosphere in the farmhouse thickened with each passing day. It felt as if the house itself was breathing, exhaling dread and inhaling the Perron family's peace. Carolyn barely slept. Her skin grew paler, eyes sunken. She no longer smiled. She had begun to change. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Carolyn froze in place. Her hands trembled. She looked down and realized she was gripping a shirt so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Then she noticed the bruises again, new ones, deeper, as though someone had wrapped hands around her torso and squeezed. Downstairs, Andrea and Christine heard thuds from the second floor. They found Carolyn in the hallway, staring at the wall, whispering to herself. "Mom?" Andrea called. Carolyn turned her head slowly. Her expression was blank, except for her eyes. Her eyes were wrong. They were cold. Empty. "She wants me to understand," Carolyn murmured. "Who?" Christine asked, inching back. "She lost her baby. She wants mine." That night, Roger returned home to find all 5 girls huddled in the living room, too afraid to go upstairs. April was crying. Andrea was pale and shaking. Roger stormed up to their bedroom and found Carolyn standing in front of the mirror, her hand pressed flat against it. She didn't react to his voice at first. Then slowly she turned and whispered, "Roger, she showed me everything." "Who, Carolyn? Who are you talking about?" "Bathsheba. She said I'm hers now." She collapsed in his arms. Later that night, Roger was awakened by the sound of wood dragging across the floor. When he opened his eyes, he saw the heavy wardrobe across the room slowly moving on its own, screeching as it slid. Carolyn remained asleep beside him, smiling faintly in her dreams. But it wasn't a peaceful smile. It was Bathsheba's. The farmhouse had many rooms, some cozy, some lifeless, and one that had always felt wrong. It was the guest room with a full-length mirror that stood bolted to the wall. No one remembered putting it there. It didn't reflect the room correctly. The angle was off. One evening, Nancy and Christine dared each other to play in the guest room. "Let's try Bloody Mary," Nancy whispered, giggling nervously. Christine hesitated. "I don't think we should. Mom says not to play games like that." Nancy rolled her eyes and closed the door behind them. "It's just a mirror. Come on." They stood in front of it and chanted softly, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody." The mirror shimmered. Nancy jumped back. "Did you see that?" Before Christine could answer, the mirror began to darken. Their reflections faded. A new figure emerged behind them, tall, gaunt, her face twisted in agony, with deep hollow sockets where eyes should be. Christine screamed. The mirror shattered violently, sending glass across the room. Roger rushed in moments later to find the girls in the corner, trembling. "We didn't touch it." Nancy sobbed. "She was in there." Roger stared at the shattered mirror. In the center of the broken shards, a shape remained intact, a woman hanging from a tree. Meanwhile, downstairs, Carolyn stood in the kitchen, humming an unfamiliar lullaby. The melody was eerie, old, and not in any language she knew. When Roger asked her what song it was, she tilted her head, confused. "I don't know. It just came to me." That night, she sang it again in her sleep, louder, more forcefully. In the other room, the girls heard it through the walls and covered their ears. But Bathsheba was listening. And smiling. Again. For the past week, every supernatural event, every slam, scream, whisper, occurred precisely at that time. The family began calling it the hour of Bathsheba. That night, Andrea couldn't sleep. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, her heart uneasy. She kept hearing scratching, soft, irregular. It sounded like nails along the wall. Suddenly, a thud. From inside the wardrobe. She sat up, breathing heavily. The room was pitch dark. She reached for her flashlight, flicked it on, and slowly stepped toward the large, antique wardrobe at the far end of the room. Another thud. Louder. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door. She flung it open, nothing but hanging dresses swaying gently, though there was no breeze. She turned to go back to bed. Then something leapt from the top of the wardrobe. It was fast. It was heavy. It hit her with a force that knocked the wind from her lungs. Andrea screamed, thrashing against the weight on her chest. Nancy burst in and turned on the light. There was nothing there. But Andrea was on the floor, gasping, claw marks on her arms. 4 long red welts, still fresh. Downstairs, Roger rushed to the girls' room while Carolyn sat upright in bed, eyes wide and unblinking. "I saw her," she whispered as Roger helped Andrea. "Who?" he asked. Carolyn's voice was cold, distant. "Bathsheba. In the mirror. She was holding a baby and a knife." Roger's face drained of color. "I think she's going to make me do it," she said, trembling. The next day, Roger called for help. Word of the Perron family's haunting spread through whispers in the nearby town. Talk of witchcraft, screaming children, and a house that wouldn't let go. Eventually, those whispers reached Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife team known for investigating the paranormal. When Roger called them, he was desperate. "My wife, she's not the same. Something's inside her. My kids are afraid to sleep. The house, it hates us." Within days, the Warrens arrived. Lorraine stepped onto the property first. The moment her feet touched the earth near the farmhouse, she stopped cold. Her breath hitched. She clutched Ed's hand. "She's still here," Lorraine whispered. "She never left." Inside, the air was thick. Lorraine moved slowly through each room, her eyes flicking from corner to shadow, her gift as a clairvoyant revealing more than anyone could see. She manifests strongest at 3:07 a.m., Carolyn explained, pale and exhausted. I wake up bruised. I lose time. Lorraine touched her hand gently. That's oppression. The second stage before possession. Ed examined the house, noting cold spots, smells of sulfur, and unexplainable noises. He turned to Roger. You're dealing with something inhuman. We'll need to document everything before the church considers an exorcism. That night, the Warrens stayed. At 3:07 a.m., Lorraine sat upright in bed, staring at the ceiling. Something was in the house, moving fast. She stood and followed the pull she felt down the hallway to the basement door. She opened it slowly. From the darkness below, a woman's voice rose in a hoarse whisper. Leave. Or join us. Lorraine's eyes widened. She descended one step, then another. As she reached the bottom, she turned on her flashlight and gasped. On the dirt floor were dozens of small bones, infant bones, and a single noose hanging from the rafters above. Bathsheba had never left. She had simply been waiting. The tension in the house had thickened to an unbearable level. Carolyn's condition worsened by the hour. At dinner, she would sit staring at the table, muttering under her breath, her hands trembling. It was clear that whatever Bathsheba had intended was nearly complete. Ed and Lorraine knew that time was running out. We need to perform a ritual, Ed said, his voice firm but filled with concern. It's the only way to stop this before it consumes her completely. The house felt alive that night as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The walls whispered in low, guttural tones. Shadows moved in the corners of every room, flickering like something alive. At 3:07 a.m., the air in the house shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the family could feel the heaviness that hung over them like a storm about to break. Carolyn was already in the living room, her face pale and blank. Ed and Lorraine began their preparations, chanting in Latin, drawing sacred symbols on the walls. Then it happened. Carolyn's body jerked violently, her arms flailing as if someone was controlling them. Her head snapped back, eyes wide open but vacant, filled with only rage and hatred. I will never leave. Bathsheba's voice echoed, deep and distorted, coming from Carolyn's throat. Roger screamed as Carolyn's body contorted unnaturally, her limbs twisting in ways they should not. The air was thick with malevolent energy, as if every dark soul from the house had come together to witness the struggle. Lorraine stepped forward, her face stricken with both fear and resolve. We have to make her face her past. Bathsheba, you have no claim here anymore. Your time is over. But Bathsheba's laughter echoed again, a chilling, mocking sound that filled the room. I am the mother of all things. This house will never be free. Ed threw holy water on Carolyn, and for a moment she stiffened, her body racked with spasms. The air crackled with a violent surge of energy, as though the house itself was fighting back. Suddenly the room went silent. Carolyn collapsed to the floor lifeless. But her eyes were wide open. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Carolyn whispered, her voice soft and broken, as if she was being released from the grip of the dark force. Lorraine dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had saved her, but at what cost? The house was eerily silent after the confrontation. Carolyn lay unconscious on the floor, her breathing shallow, but she was free from the influence that had controlled her for so long. Ed and Lorraine carefully approached her, performing a final blessing over her. They knew it wasn't over. Bathsheba's curse still lingered in the air, the evil energy still vibrating through the house. But for now, the immediate threat had been removed. Roger and the girls gathered around Carolyn, their faces pale and frightened, yet relieved. It was hard to believe she was truly herself again. Mom? Andrea whispered, her voice trembling. Carolyn blinked, slowly coming to. She looked around, disoriented, as if seeing everything for the first time. Roger knelt beside her. Carolyn, are you all right? She nodded, her eyes filled with confusion. I don't know. I was somewhere else. The Warrens stepped back, giving the family space. Ed exchanged a look with Lorraine, their faces grim. They had saved Carolyn, but they knew it wasn't the end of the story. There's still more to do, Ed said quietly, turning to Roger. The house needs to be cleansed. The spirits inside aren't gone. We'll perform a final exorcism to remove the rest of the evil. Lorraine, still shaken by the events, placed a hand on Carolyn's shoulder. We'll make sure you're safe. But the house must be cleansed first. Bathsheba's spirit was powerful, and she'll try to take others if we don't finish this. As Ed prepared for the ritual, the family stood in silence. The atmosphere in the house had shifted, but there was still a lingering sense of dread. At 3:07 a.m., the grandfather clock began to chime again, marking the hour when the dark force had always taken its toll. But this time nothing happened. No movement. No whispers. No screams. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Ed and Lorraine began their prayers, their voices rising in unison. The air thickened, but the darkness did not return. The house, it seemed, was finally yielding. After the exorcism was completed, the Warrens believed the house had finally been freed of Bathsheba's malevolent presence. The family, while still shaken, could breathe a little easier. The eerie feeling that had once consumed every inch of the house had lessened, and Carolyn's condition began to improve dramatically. The bruises that had once marred her body faded, and her spirit seemed to return to her. Yet, there was a lingering presence, an uncomfortable heaviness that none of them could shake. One afternoon, Lorraine returned for a final check-in. As soon as she entered the house, she felt it, an oppressive energy still weighing down the air. "I don't understand," she murmured, glancing around. "Bathsheba is gone, but there's something else." Roger noticed it too. The children, though no longer tormented by the same sinister visions and whispers, still didn't sleep well. April had begun talking about the man in the corner again, an entity that she claimed stood just beyond the edge of her sight. Lorraine's face grew pale. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. There are others. Spirits who were trapped by Bathsheba's influence. They're still here, lost, angry. They were never freed. Ed joined her, frowning. The house wasn't just haunted by Bathsheba. It was a place of power for other restless spirits. When she was defeated, they didn't just vanish. "Do you think they're dangerous?" Roger asked, his voice filled with concern. "Not if they're left to rest," Lorraine replied. "But if they're provoked, they could become violent. We need to make sure these spirits are at peace before they turn vengeful." At that moment, as if to prove Lorraine's point, a loud crash rang through the house. The living room lamp shattered, sending glass across the floor. The children screamed in unison. "I'll stay," Lorraine said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'll contact the church for further assistance. But this isn't finished." Days passed, but the unease in the Perron household never fully dissipated. Even though Bathsheba's evil influence had been driven out, the house still felt haunted. The spirits that lingered there, those who had been victims of the curse, remained trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Lorraine returned with a team of spiritual specialists to attempt to communicate with the spirits and guide them to the afterlife. The family watched from a distance as the rituals began, each member holding their breath, wondering if the house would finally be free from its dark grip. In the center of the living room, the group set up a circle of candles, each one flickering despite the stillness of the air. Lorraine held a pendulum in her hand, her eyes closed in deep concentration. Her voice was low as she began to chant, calling upon the spirits trapped in the house. Almost immediately the room grew cold. A gust of wind swept through the house, blowing out several of the candles. The walls groaned under unseen pressure. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the shadows, "We were forgotten." Ed, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "We hear you. We are here to help you find peace. You're not forgotten." Another voice, distorted and hollow, echoed through the room. Help us, they won't let us go." Roger, his face pale, looked to Lorraine. "What does that mean? Who won't let them go?" Lorraine's expression was grim. "The spirits here are bound by something even stronger than Bathsheba. They were never given the chance to move on. Something or someone is holding them to this place." As if to prove Lorraine's words, a low growl filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards. The temperature dropped again, the air thick with malevolent energy. A figure materialized in the corner of the room, tall and cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing a sickly red. "We have not been forgotten." Carolyn, who had been standing by the window, turned to face the figure. Her body stiffened as she locked eyes with it. What is this?" she gasped, her voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, its form shifting like smoke. "We are the ones who were never released. We will not rest until we are free." Ed held up a crucifix, his voice steady as he recited a prayer of protection. The figure recoiled but did not retreat. Lorraine turned to the family. "The curse of Bathsheba may have been broken, but the darkness that binds these spirits is more powerful than we realized. There's a malevolent force that holds them here. We need to get rid of it before it consumes them all." Roger's heart pounded in his chest. "How do we stop it?" "We can't do it alone," Ed replied, his tone grim. This is beyond our abilities. We need the full force of the church." The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The Perron family lived in a constant state of tension. Even though the Warrens had brought some relief, the presence in the house was far from gone. Each night, the spirits' whispers grew louder, and the house's oppressive energy returned like an old friend that refused to leave. The dark figure that had appeared before them, a shadowy, indistinct entity, continued to haunt the house. The family saw it often, moving swiftly across hallways, peering through windows, its glowing eyes watching them from the darkness. It was as though it fed off their fear. Lorraine, once again, stepped into the house to attempt communication with the restless spirits. This time she was joined by a priest, Father Kastner, who had been sent by the church to help. He was a seasoned exorcist, one who had seen things that most would never believe. Father Kastner began the ceremony, his voice calm but firm, reciting ancient rites meant to purify the house. As he chanted, Lorraine walked through the rooms, sensing the spiritual forces at play. But something was different. The air was thicker, heavier. There was something in the house that was far more malevolent than the spirits they had encountered before. Suddenly, Lorraine stopped dead in her tracks. She looked around, her face drained of color. The shadows were watching her. "It's not just the spirits," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's something else here. Something older." Father Kastner paused in his chanting, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Lorraine turned to face him, her eyes wide. "It's not just a haunting. It's a presence, an entity that has been waiting here for a long time." At that moment, a voice echoed through the room, low and guttural. "You should have left us alone." The temperature plummeted. A gust of wind slammed against the walls, shaking the house. The lights flickered. And then, standing in front of them, was the figure again, this time more defined. Its face was now visible, twisted in a grotesque mask of hatred. Its eyes burned with a deep, unholy fire. Father Kastner stepped forward, raising his hand to shield Lorraine. "In the name of God, we command you to reveal yourself." The figure's form flickered, then solidified into something that shocked them all. It was Bathsheba. But this time she was not just a woman. She was a force, a darkness that had been feeding on the souls of those who had passed through the house, growing more powerful with each life claimed. She was not merely a witch, she was something far more sinister, an ancient being who had been hiding in the shadows for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. "You should have never come here," Bathsheba's voice rumbled, echoing in every corner of the room. "This is my domain now, and I will take everything from you." The presence of Bathsheba, now more monstrous and terrifying than ever, shrouded the room in an overwhelming darkness. The walls trembled with the weight of her power. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque, elongated shadows as the entity loomed before them. Father Kastner clutched the crucifix tightly, his voice unwavering as he began the ancient prayer to banish the spirit. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we command you to leave this place." But Bathsheba's laughter, cruel and hollow, filled the room. "You cannot banish what was never meant to be gone," she spat. "I have waited for centuries, feeding on the suffering of all who entered. This house is mine." Lorraine stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "You were never meant to have control over these souls. You've destroyed lives and now you'll be destroyed." Bathsheba's face twisted in fury. "I do not fear you, witch." The room seemed to pulse with the raw energy of their confrontation, the air so thick it felt as if it was pressing in on them from all sides. The windows rattled, and the floorboards creaked as if the house itself were alive, reacting to the battle unfolding within. Ed, standing beside Lorraine, held up a vial of holy water, and with a sudden motion, he threw it at Bathsheba. The water splashed across the figure, and she shrieked in agony, her form distorting like a broken reflection. But she did not vanish. Instead, she grew stronger, her body contorting and shifting, becoming something even more grotesque. Her skin melted away, revealing a writhing mass of shadows, limbs and eyes, all staring, all watching. Ed and Lorraine moved quickly to form a protective circle around the Perron family. Carolyn, still weakened, clung to Roger as he held their daughters tightly, trying to shield them from the chaos around them. The atmosphere crackled with malevolent energy. Father Kastner's voice rang out once again. "In the name of the Holy Spirit, I command you, leave this place." Bathsheba's face morphed into a twisted grin. "You think you can banish me with prayers and holy water? I am eternal. I am the embodiment of this place." Suddenly, a violent surge of energy ripped through the room, sending the entire family to the ground. The force was so powerful, the air became nearly unbearable, thick with rage. But through it, Ed and Lorraine continued their chants, refusing to back down. Then something changed. Lorraine felt a presence, a soft, gentle warmth, inside her mind. She turned and saw a glimpse of the spirits trapped within the house, their faces desperate but pleading. Among them was a small child, smiling faintly, offering her a look of hope. "They want to be free," Lorraine whispered. Ed, realizing what needed to be done, shouted over the chaos. "We need to set them free. We can't defeat Bathsheba without releasing the spirits she's bound." Lorraine nodded, her face grim but filled with purpose. She extended her hand toward the air, invoking the spirit's release. "You are not forgotten. It's time to move on." The room grew colder, and the shadows began to recede, swirling toward Bathsheba. The spirits of the lost, their faces full of sorrow, began to manifest one by one, pulling together to form a collective force against the dark entity. Bathsheba howled in rage as the spirits poured their energy into her, attempting to overpower her dark influence. With a final desperate scream, she lunged at the group, her claws outstretched, but she was met with an overwhelming force. The light from the spirits, glowing bright and fierce, collided with Bathsheba's form, causing her to shrink and writhe in pain. "This is the end for you." Lorraine's voice was steady as she took the final step in the ritual. Bathsheba's body began to disintegrate, her form unraveling into a black, swirling mist. The house shook violently, and the walls groaned as if being torn apart from the inside. With a deafening roar, the darkness vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. The temperature rose back to normal, and the oppressive feeling that had lingered for so long lifted. The spirits that had once been trapped began to disappear, their faces now peaceful as they moved toward the light. The Perron family, still trembling, remained on the ground, but the room had changed. The suffocating evil that had consumed their home was finally gone. It had been days since the final confrontation with Bathsheba, and yet the house still carried the weight of its history. The air, once heavy with dark energy, had lightened. But something had shifted, and the scars of what had happened remained etched into every corner of the Perron household. Carolyn and Roger stood in the kitchen, silently washing dishes together. The house, while no longer under the oppressive grip of Bathsheba, felt quieter now. But the quiet was unsettling. The children were still trying to adjust. Andrea had started talking again. Only this time she wasn't speaking about the dark shadowy figures, but about her dreams. Dreams where she saw things that couldn't possibly be real. Strange, ethereal beings that hovered in the corners of her mind. She would wake up trembling, terrified to close her eyes again. April, the youngest, was no better. She still talked about the man in the corner, a figure that wasn't evil but more sorrowful. She said he had been stuck for a very long time, and he was waiting for something. Waiting for her to help him. Roger had spent hours cleaning the house, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, he could never rid the place of the lingering feeling that something had been lost. The house felt empty even when it was full. He would often find himself staring at the fireplace, remembering the terrifying moments when they thought they were going to lose everything. Ed and Lorraine had returned to the house several times, monitoring the family's well-being. Lorraine had a nagging feeling, something that gnawed at her thoughts. The spirits, though freed from their torment, had left something behind. The house wasn't just a place of evil, it had become a memorial to the suffering, a reminder of everything that had happened here. There were too many broken memories. One night, as the family sat down to dinner, Lorraine pulled Carolyn aside. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice low. "There's something we didn't do. Something I should have noticed before." Carolyn, still fragile from everything she had endured, gave her a puzzled look. "What do you mean?" "The spirits have gone, but not all of them were freed in the way they should have been. There were still some lingering attachments," Lorraine explained, her eyes filled with sorrow. "The house itself, it's still holding on to those memories." Carolyn's face darkened as she looked around their home, her eyes sweeping over the rooms that had once been their sanctuary. "So we're not truly free?" Lorraine shook her head, her hand gently touching Carolyn's arm. "Not yet. The house is haunted, yes, but it's haunted by memories more than by spirits. The energy of everything that's happened here, the suffering, the pain, has left its mark. It will take time, but it can heal." "But what if it never heals?" Carolyn whispered, the weight of everything they had endured closing in on her. "It will," Lorraine assured her, her voice firm. "We just have to be patient." The weeks that followed were filled with mixed emotions. The Perron family found themselves in a strange limbo, caught between relief and the haunting aftermath of their experiences. The house, now physically free of the dark forces that had once controlled it, still held an invisible weight, a heaviness that none of them could fully shake. Carolyn and Roger tried their best to move forward. They attended counseling sessions together, hoping to address the psychological toll that the haunting had taken on them. Yet, no matter how hard they tried, it was clear that they would never be able to truly leave the past behind. Andrea had become withdrawn. She still couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, even when she was alone. Her dreams were filled with the faces of the spirits who had been trapped in the house, their eyes filled with both sadness and regret. But there was something else in those dreams, something darker, something that watched from the shadows. April, meanwhile, had become eerily quiet. She no longer spoke about the man in the corner, but she would sometimes stand in the middle of a room, staring at nothing as if waiting for something to happen. She often talked to herself in a language no one could understand. One night, as the family sat together in the living room, they felt the house shift, just a little. It was subtle but undeniable. A creak in the floorboards, a faint whisper in the air. Carolyn stiffened, her eyes darting around the room. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Roger, sitting beside her, nodded slowly. "I did. It was like a voice." The room fell silent. The presence, though no longer physical, still seemed to linger. They had thought that the darkness had been banished, but now it felt like it was simply waiting. Watching. Later that evening, Lorraine and Ed Warren arrived for another check-in, sensing the disturbance in the air. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ed asked, his voice serious as he entered the home. Lorraine nodded, her expression pensive. "It's subtle, but it's there. I thought it might be a residual energy left behind by Bathsheba's influence, but now, I'm not sure. There's something else here." Carolyn frowned, her heart sinking. "You mean we're still not safe?" Lorraine placed a comforting hand on Carolyn's shoulder. "It's not about being safe. It's about understanding that the house, the land itself, carries the energy of everything that's happened. The spirits were freed, but the trauma left behind is still raw. It will take time for it to heal completely." "But what if it never does?" Carolyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ed looked around, his eyes narrowing. "If something is still here, we'll confront it. Together. You don't have to face this alone." The air grew heavier as they all sat in silence, contemplating the reality of their situation. The house was no longer home to Bathsheba's evil, but the scars it had left behind were deep, far deeper than any of them had realized. Months had passed since the battle with Bathsheba, and life in the Perron household had slowly started to resemble normalcy once again. Carolyn and Roger tried to rebuild their lives, focusing on their children, and working to put the horrors of the past behind them. But no matter how hard they tried, something continued to linger in the corners of their minds. The house, once filled with oppressive darkness, now stood in a haunting silence. The sounds of the wind rustling through the trees outside or the distant hum of the highway were the only noises that broke the stillness. But at night, when the house was quiet and everyone lay in their beds, the eerie feeling of being watched never truly left. It had been a particularly cold evening when Andrea, now a teenager, woke with a start. She had heard something, a whisper so faint that it could have been imagined. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The room was still. She glanced at her younger sister, April, who was sleeping soundly beside her, oblivious to the strange disturbance. Andrea tried to shake off the feeling, but it gnawed at her. Her mind flashed back to the things she had seen, the dark figures in the corners of her vision, the way the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. She stood up from her bed, her feet cold against the hardwood floor, and cautiously made her way down the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creaks of old wood. She paused at the staircase, her eyes drawn to the shadows that stretched unnaturally in the dim light. And then she saw it. A figure, just a flicker at first, hovering near the bottom of the stairs. It was tall, but it was the eyes that held her captive. They were cold, empty eyes, staring up at her with a haunting intensity. The figure didn't move, but Andrea could feel its gaze upon her. Frozen with fear, Andrea watched as the figure slowly melted into the shadows, vanishing before her eyes. She couldn't breathe. The memories of the haunting, of everything she had endured, came rushing back in an overwhelming flood. Was it Bathsheba? Was it another spirit trapped in the house? Or was it something worse? Meanwhile, in the living room, Carolyn and Roger sat together, trying to find peace in their own way. The house seemed to be watching them, the walls heavy with memories. It was in those moments, when the world outside was asleep, that they began to feel the oppressive weight of their experiences, as though something inside the house was unwilling to let go. Suddenly, Carolyn felt it, a coldness creeping in from the far corners of the room. She looked over to Roger, who was staring off into space as if he too could feel the shift. "I thought we were done with this," Carolyn whispered, her voice shaky. Roger didn't answer. He simply nodded, his expression distant. Just then Andrea burst into the room, her face pale with terror. "Mom? Dad? I saw something." Carolyn jumped to her feet. "What did you see, sweetheart? Tell me." Andrea's voice trembled as she spoke. "There was a man. He was standing by the stairs, staring at me. His eyes, I don't know. It was like he was waiting." Roger rushed to her side. "It's okay, Andrea. You're safe. You've been through a lot. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you." But Andrea shook her head. "No, it wasn't just in my head. I saw him. He was real." A cold silence filled the room. Carolyn exchanged a look with Roger, both of them feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Lorraine and Ed arrived the following day, having been contacted by the Perrons once more. When they heard what had happened, Lorraine's expression grew grim. "I was afraid of this," Lorraine said softly. "The spirits we freed weren't the only ones trapped in this house. The darkness, it's residual. It's like a stain on the land, a part of it now. It won't leave so easily." Ed nodded, his face tight with concern. "What you're feeling, what Andrea saw, it's a manifestation of the house's past. It's not one spirit, but a collection of memories and energy from all the suffering that took place here. The land itself is cursed." Carolyn's heart sank. "So this isn't over?" Lorraine's voice was filled with sorrow. "Not entirely. The house has been cleansed of its inhabiting spirits, but the memories of what happened here are still alive. Until the land itself can be healed, the echoes will remain." The Perron family had always hoped that they could leave the darkness behind, that their lives would one day return to normal. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became increasingly clear that the house, the land itself, was not going to release them so easily. The presence Andrea had felt on that fateful night, the figure lurking at the bottom of the stairs, was not a one-time occurrence. It had returned. In the dead of night, she would often hear footsteps echoing through the hallways, soft whispers brushing the back of her neck, and shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of her vision. Sometimes she would see fleeting figures out of the corner of her eye, no more than a blur but always unsettling. Carolyn and Roger tried to convince themselves that it was all in their minds, the lingering effects of the horrors they had endured. They had moved forward. They had tried to heal. But deep down they both knew that something wasn't right. The house, though seemingly empty of the spirits that had tormented them, still held a presence, a deep, suffocating weight. It was late one evening when Lorraine and Ed returned to the house. Lorraine's expression was solemn, her eyes filled with a mixture of empathy and concern. "We've done everything we can," Ed said, his voice low. "But sometimes the land itself, when it's been tainted by such suffering, doesn't know how to let go. It holds on." Carolyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "So we can't escape it? We'll never be free?" Lorraine's eyes softened as she placed a hand on Carolyn's shoulder. "It's not that you're not free. You are. The spirits, the entities, they're no longer here. But the energy left behind, it can be like a scar. You can't erase it, but you can learn to live with it. Over time it will fade." Andrea, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke up, her voice trembling. "But what if it doesn't fade? What if it gets worse?" Roger stepped toward his daughter, his voice gentle but firm. "We'll face it together. Whatever this is, we won't let it tear us apart." But even as he spoke the words, Roger couldn't shake the feeling that they were all still being watched, that there was something in the house that was waiting. It wasn't malevolent like Bathsheba had been. It wasn't the ghosts of the trapped souls that had once wandered the halls. It was different. It was the house itself. That night, the family sat together in the living room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls. The house felt strangely peaceful, but there was still a pervasive sense of unease, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. A cold breeze swept through even though the windows were closed, and the air seemed to grow thick. Carolyn shivered and looked around the room, her heart racing. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Roger nodded, his eyes wide with concern. "I don't know, it's like the air is heavier." Andrea sat frozen, her eyes fixed on something just beyond the edge of the room. Her voice, barely audible, broke the silence. "There's someone here." Everyone turned to look at her. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "There's a woman," Andrea continued, her voice shaking. "She's standing in the doorway. She's watching us." Carolyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, scanning the room. But there was no one there. The doorway to the kitchen was empty. The house was still. But Andrea remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the space where the figure had been. "She's angry," Andrea whispered, her voice trembling. "She wants something. She's waiting for something." Lorraine stepped forward, her eyes narrowing in thought. This isn't like the other spirits. It's not Bathsheba. It's something else." Ed, his face pale, spoke slowly. "What if it's one of the spirits still tied to the land? What if it's a residual imprint, one of the souls that was never able to move on?" Carolyn's eyes welled up with tears. "What? Why is this happening to us?" Ed placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone. The spirits are gone, but this is different. This is a remnant of the suffering. But we can help you. We'll perform one last cleansing ritual. We'll help the house find peace." Lorraine nodded in agreement. "The healing process can be slow, but it will happen. We just need to give it time, and if necessary we'll come back and perform another ritual." As the family huddled together, the room seemed to grow colder still, but there was a glimmer of hope in their hearts. This house had seen unimaginable horrors, but it had also borne witness to a family's strength, their resolve. Perhaps the darkness wasn't truly gone, but maybe, just maybe, they could learn to live with it, to heal the land with time. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft golden light through the windows of the Perron house. The storm that had lingered in the air for so long was beginning to pass, but the scars of the past still hung in the corners of the rooms, as if waiting to be acknowledged one last time. Lorraine and Ed Warren had arrived early that morning, preparing for what would be the final cleansing ritual. They had spoken to the Perrons the night before, telling them that this would be the end. This time they would rid the land of its lingering darkness for good. The family sat together in the living room, their faces worn with exhaustion but also with a quiet sense of resolve. It had been a long, hard journey, but they had made it through. They had fought the darkness together, and now they would see it through to the end. "I know you're all tired," Lorraine began, her voice gentle yet firm. "But today is the day when we can finally heal. The house has suffered for so long, but with this final ritual, we can release it from its past." Ed stood by the window, his eyes scanning the surrounding land. "This place has held so many painful memories, but it also holds the possibility of healing. We can't erase what's happened here, but we can help the land find peace." Roger looked over at Carolyn, his hand reaching out to grasp hers. "We've made it this far. We can do this. For ourselves. For our family." Carolyn nodded, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "I just want this to be over. I don't want to live in fear anymore." The room was quiet as Lorraine began the ritual, her voice low and steady as she called on the higher powers to cleanse the house once and for all. Candles flickered around the room, casting eerie shadows as Lorraine and Ed chanted softly, their words filling the air with a sense of sacred purpose. As the ritual continued, the temperature in the room dropped, but it wasn't the coldness of fear, it was the coldness of release. The house seemed to breathe as though it were exhaling all of the pain it had held for so many years. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the air lightened. The heaviness that had clung to the walls faded, and the oppressive sense of being watched slowly dissipated. The silence in the room deepened, but it was no longer a terrifying silence. It was the silence of peace, of resolution. The ritual was complete. Lorraine opened her eyes, her gaze soft yet determined. "It's done. The house is free." For a moment no one moved. The weight that had been pressing on them for so long was finally gone. The air felt different, cleaner, fresher. And for the first time in years, Carolyn felt as though she could breathe without fear. "Thank you," Carolyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Ed smiled gently, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "The house is free now, but remember, the past will always be a part of you. It's up to you to choose how you move forward. You've all been through so much. Let the healing begin." The family stood together, their arms around one another, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of peace, a sense of hope. They had survived the darkness, and now they could move forward into the light. As they walked outside, the sun's rays touched the land as if blessing the ground beneath their feet. The house, once filled with terror, now stood quietly in the early morning light, a silent witness to the pain and the healing that had taken place within its walls. The Perron family would never forget what had happened here. The scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with them. But the darkness that had once consumed them was no longer a threat. They had faced it and emerged victorious. They were free.